Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. First of all, I apologize if there's a little bit of background noise in my report today. Got a contractor out at the house doing some work on the back side of it. So again, I apologize if you hear a hammer going or the generator outside getting the compressor up and running. That's what you hear. You've been looking, though, at a map showing you the latest U.S. drought monitor, and this is one that I really want to spend just a moment talking about, and it's because of where we've seen relief in the drought and where we're seeing the drought getting worse. So as we normally do, let's go up to the Maps tab, come down here to Change Maps, and go have a look here just at the last week, because throughout much of North and South Carolina, there was some one-class improvement, while a broad area in the Mid-South and Southern Plains saw degradation of drought. If we take this back over the last month, we can really start to see where the rains have kind of come over the ridge that set up right here and just really started to deliver better storms. Now, some of those storms produce a lot of severe weather, and just in the last week, I've seen numerous reports of wind damage throughout the Carolinas because of this. But when you just examine the whole country in terms of the haves and have-nots, this map maybe really summarizes what we've seen here in the middle of July. It's the last 2 weeks of precipitation compared to normal. And if we start over here in North Carolina, there's a pocket right in through here, a couple of areas back toward the Appalachian Mountains, and then this section of South Carolina that has been drier. We've been a little drier here in this section of Central Virginia as well. But outside of that, you can see the influence of that ridge really taking shape here in the Central Plains and parts of the Western Corn Belt. And I want you to keep this this map in the back of your mind as we go forward because of the changes we just saw in the pattern. Now, over the last 7 days, there was some locally heavy rainfall came through here, parts of the Mid-South, Southeast, and then we saw scattered storms throughout the Carolinas and Virginia that locally delivered some heavier rainfall. But when you look at where the soil moisture issues are, notice Northern Virginia, parts here of the Piedmont and the coastal plain of North Carolina, then back throughout the Ohio River Valley, into the lower Mississippi River Valley, and a large section here of the central United States, still dealing with very low soil moisture, which means any rain that comes through, it's not going to be enough to completely revive this. More is going to be needed to sustain the crop. And our pattern shift we talked about last week is now fully in place. What does it favor? A ridge right off the west coast. I'm talking about this feature right here. Then the jet stream dives down here and curls itself around a low that is sitting over parts of the Hudson Bay. So weak frontal boundaries will stall out in this area and just slowly move themselves toward the south and east. Now we've got a subtropical eye here and a broader area of subtropical ridging here. And so the question is, how far to the south can those troughs push to bring in the cooler air, to bring in the relief from precipitation? And our models right now are giving us two different scenarios. I'm going to point both of those out to you this morning. First of all, what's the European model say? Now, again, this is compared to normal wetter conditions versus drier, all right? You notice that when you take North Carolina and just split it, basically, if you're north of that line, near normal to wetter than normal conditions, south of it, drier. You see it keeps the wettest weather here throughout the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, wrapping all the way back into parts of the Central Plains. All of that is just on this lingering front that sits right here, okay? Now, south of it, Texas stays hot. Northern part of it, while we're cooler in this area, we're going to be seeing drier conditions. But the big question is, how far do those fronts get to us? Because that'll tell us what our temperatures are going to look like. Notice that over the next 10 days, that's what we're looking at here. The European model favors right across North Carolina these warmer conditions overall. While they've got cooler weather coming in here, while all the heat really builds to the west under that ridge. But you'll see in a few moments that the GFS brings in the cooler weather quicker, and it also brings in much wetter weather. I'm going to explain to you both of those models in a few seconds. But the big question for me, honestly, these are all kind of near-term issues. Do we keep this ridge around? Because we've not seen a ridge develop here and stick around for more than a few days, going all the way back to, my goodness, the beginning of the year. It's just not happened. So the fact that there's a ridge in place there now, we just have to ask the question, does it stick around? The La Nina is still there. See this? Strong trade winds fueling the upwelling of that colder water. But it's been the warm water that's developed here. The warm water that's here in the Bering Sea getting back over toward just north of Japan that's really as of late altered this jet stream pattern. We still have The warmer water that comes off of Africa moves into the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and just off the coast, which means we're primed for tropical cyclones if they do get into that area and go. But I just have questions about the longevity of the ridge that's setting up here, given the fact there's still some cooler water in that location and much of the heat here. Because to be honest, if this heat, ready, was over that X, then the ridge would stay there and not go anywhere. The fact that it's a little bit farther to the west and keeps building a bit to the west means maybe we should expect more ridging to return in this area and those troughs to come back. That puts another ridge over the midsection of the country. We get the northwest flow out of this and storms. See how that all kind of unfolds? That's what much of June and July gave us. So is this temporary? That's our big question for today. Well, the La Nina, as I said, still going, and I want to give you the long-term outlook on that first. Columbia University, great institute here for doing subseasonal forecasting. They released this to us in early July, and this is their latest mid-July outlook. So I'm going to click on that one to give you the details here. So we got 3 different bars. The blue bars tell you for the time period, these 3-month sliding window here, whether or not you have a higher probability of a La Nina in blue. Gray would be gray would be neutral. Red would be El Nino. So what we notice here is that through September, October, November, all the way to December, January, February, the highest probability of the behavior of the Pacific is to maintain La Nina. But then you start to see, once we get into winter, those probabilities change dramatically. Better chances of neutral conditions, and this is the highest chance I've seen of an El Nino developing. It's now up there around 15%. That's 15%, but it's there going into midwinter next winter. Okay, we're dealing with this in the near term, and I'll tell you right now, the trade winds are screaming. That's what's going to continue to keep the colder water here and our strong La Nina signal. That's not going anywhere. The Indian Ocean's given us a lot of westerly winds. See all this? And they're all just meeting right here, pushing that MJO to phase 5 and 6. Now, normally if I saw the MJO in phase 5, 6, I would be thinking about the tropical activity in the Atlantic. But at this point, over the next 5 days, National Hurricane Center has kind of squashed the outlook on possible tropical systems here. And even just this morning, I was looking at some of the satellite imagery. Look at all the dust coming off of the Saharan. I mean, just an incredible amount of dust stretching all the way out here into the open Atlantic. We do see some tropical thunderstorms here, but they're not well organized. No deep areas of low pressure. And just really nothing to speak about in the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean or just off the coast. So we're going to push our hurricane risk farther into the month of August because there's nothing brewing right now, at least that I can see, across the Atlantic, the Caribbean, or the Gulf of Mexico. But we do have questions. Are we going to push toward a more active hurricane season, which we're anticipating given the setup with this La Nina? That's what La Ninas tend to support. Well, to answer that question, let's do 2 things. We know that in the near term, some subtropical ridging here is going to keep things relatively dry, and that could split North Carolina north and south on precipitation. We see that over the next 15 days, this corridor in through here is probably going to have the highest probability of staying wetter than average, and that pushes up against the Appalachian Mountains and then really gets just on this side of those mountains here with some pretty heavy rainfall. Texas stays hotter and drier, the Pacific Northwest hotter and drier. But as I stated, how long does that last? Well, the new European weeklies cut it off by next week. Here's what they're showing for the whole month of August. Now, what do you notice? We start to see drier conditions resurfacing back in the mid part of the country. We see an active southwest monsoon. We see wetter conditions east of the Mississippi River. See that? That tells me that the jet stream must be going back into some sort of weak trough here, running up into a ridge over Canada, then diving into New England. That's what would put that ridge of high pressure back into place in the midsection of the country, develop the cascading storms that come out of the northwest here, and meet the weak fronts that sit along the East Coast. And if you feel like you've heard me say that before, yeah, I've said it a lot, because we've seen the subtropical ridge sit there, feeding the moisture in. The flow comes over this ridge, see where I'll put the H there, and the result is you just get convergence. And that's what gives us the better chances for showers and storms. Let me take my drawings off there and just tell you, that's the forecast for August right now. And by the way, the CPC's got this as well. Let's go have a look at the CPC data. This is their 1-month outlook for August. Whoops, let's try that again. precipitation. See, they've got us better chances at staying wetter than average because of that particular pattern getting set up. So when I come back here and just have a close look at that, it just kind of gives me this hint, there we go, that this temporary ridge in the Gulf of Alaska is just that, it's temporary. In fact, CPC also updated their seasonal drought outlook. If that ridge was gone, this area would not be at risk of going over to drought. It wouldn't be, because you'd have flow that would split and dive in through here. And instead, the models are predicting the ridge to return, which is why much of the Corn Belt, just think about this for my farmers over here that are growing corn and beans, we still have risk of drought redevelopment here in this section of the country. And by the way, just to complete that story, I showed you this second on purpose, because where that heavy rain's coming is largely going to be right here, along this corridor, which means parts of Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota that have missed out on the recent rains, because again, this is a map over the last 15 days, we could possibly see in through here drought redevelopment and the heat coming back on. Because notice, that area is not expected to have above normal rains. It's south of there. So let's keep an eye on that for those of you that are growing corn and beans over here in the Carolinas. Okay, so we've seen this. Let's go take a quick look at the August temperature forecast. And again, it's trying to keep much of that heat anchored into the Central Plains and west with time. We don't really see a risk of sustained hot temperatures around us. So that kind of gives us that outlook. Okay, today, this is what things look like this morning. There's a low. See if we can watch it here. There you go. See it curling up over there into parts of Quebec? That low has left this frontal boundary right here. And it's just going to keep sagging farther and farther to the south with time. And as it does so, it's going to increase our chances for some rainfall here, but no weather forecast model, none of them, are going to get your precipitation totals right this week. That's going to be terrible when they attempt to forecast this. By the way, if I take you back to Sunday, look at this. Let's go back. That was overnight last night. There's Sunday. Look at the size of some of these storms showing up here on satellite. I love to see those shadows of these storms. They just tell me how deep they are. Plus, look at the complex that came through Illinois and Indiana. And if you notice over here in the west, this is the fire smoke from the oak fire coming out of California. I wanted to point that out to you. So now that we've seen kind of that longer term picture and what I'm expecting the pattern to do, let's do a little bit of a breakdown of the near term pattern. So this morning, heat advisories, excessive heat warnings are out for the Mid-South getting to the Southern Plains. Same thing for the Pacific Northwest. There's the flood watch. Remember how the flow is going to come over the top of this. That's where we're expecting the heaviest rains, and they got a flood watch out for this part of Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. When we think about the rainfall chances setting up here, remember I told you there were model differences? The European, excuse me, was not very wet across central and southern North Carolina. But the U.S. models are wetter. So this is the Wpc Outlook for the next 7 days. This comes straight from the National Weather Service. This contour line in here is where we're expecting above 1.5 inches of rainfall. So you see, they're letting the forecasted position of that front get farther to the south, increasing our rainfall chances for North Carolina, not South Carolina. That's all going to be under the protection of that bigger ridge that sits here. But we could see better rains through parts of North Carolina. Again, that European model, though, watch what it does. See the front early this morning? See, as we play this forward, while we do have chances of scattered storms each day, the main frontal boundary, according to the European model, on tonight, this is Monday night, sits here. So here's the subtropical high. The flow comes around it. Yep, we'll see scattered storms, but we're waiting on that front to really just sit over us. And by Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon and evening, it's just still sitting right in this vicinity, never made it all the way to the south. Then we go out here to Wednesday morning, afternoon and evening. Do you see it? It kind of lingers just to our north. And then we go forward with this. This is now into Thursday morning, afternoon, and evening. Again, that frontal boundary is still hanging out in through here. And then let's just keep going to Friday. See it? Just not clearing the mountains getting into North and South Carolina. You will see scattered storms. There'll be heat, there'll be moisture, but the main trigger just stays, well, according to the European model, away from us. It could get there by Saturday. This is Saturday morning, afternoon, and evening. See that? Maybe by Saturday the front finally sags down and really increases our chances of precipitation. But all week long, just be watching for it to stay just to the north, which is where it may end up back on Sunday. See how it just flirts with this area? So this is what I want to show you. I love this map. What I just did was I took the US model called the GFS and subtracted its precipitation from the European, which means when you see these colors, the US model is wetter. When you see these colors, the European model is wetter. And what do you notice? The US models are wetter for North Carolina compared to the European, which is wetter farther to the west and north. So it'll be a competition all week long. And unfortunately, these are the best two models in the world. So we're just looking here at their performance, trying to gauge who and when in North Carolina is the precipitation going to come through. Who's it going to come to and when's it going to get there? So I'm going to watch that carefully. Now, take a look at this. Remember how we asked that question, how long does this ridge stick around? Well, let's play through Tuesday into Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. It's still a little bit there. See, it's doing this. Here's that subtropical ridge. See it right there. That's going to make a hard break on the haves and have-nots for the rain in the mid-Atlantic. But as we go forward, this is into this Saturday and Sunday. Look, the subtropical ridge moved. A new ridge begins to form over Nevada. Do you see the height lines dipping a little bit here, running up over this ridge and then doing that? That means that this ridge that was here is gone by this weekend. And going into early next week, we end up seeing through August 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Let's just stop it there, that the flow is back to this. Let's draw that a little better. There we go. So what do we get out of this? Ridge riding storms that build into the south and southeast. Heat comes back in through here. Cooler weather arrives in the Pacific Northwest. And that's why the week 2 precipitation pattern is now starting to see it. Do you notice that? So it's keeping the drier conditions around that subtropical high farther to the south as this moves back out to open ocean. And the wetter conditions here could start to push into the Carolinas, into Georgia, into Virginia. And that ridge reestablishes itself, the flow goes around the top, and you get that. That's what we're watching out for really that first full week of August to return. So this week, the pattern is going to be tough to decipher because of how far south that front gets. By the time we get into this evening or tomorrow, the new model runs could really adjust and pull it farther to the south. But right now, I don't have a lot of evidence to support that. If it does, it's going to get a lot wetter for us. But into week 2, this seems to be the way things are going to shift around. Okay? What are the temperatures going to do? Well, today's still quite hot. But look at all the cold weather in the Midwest versus the heat that's in the southern plains. And look at this. Really hot in the Northwest. Today's high temperatures going into Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. So you see, we flirt right here in the 90s because the front just doesn't get. See where it is right there? That front just isn't getting to us. As we go into toward Friday and Saturday, that's where the models tried to bring the front farther to the south. So you see, we're 5 to 6 degrees cooler by the time we get into the weekend. But all week long, the heat stays in Texas. The heat comes into the Pacific Northwest. It's the cooler weather in the Midwest that we're going to watch out for. So a cooler weekend after a hot week. But watch what the temperatures do as the ridge that was here moves back into the midsection of the country. This is a 5-day sliding window of temperature anomalies. So we see as we get out there, day 5 through 10, that's when we get a breakdown in our heat. But the warmth moves right back into the midsection of the country as the ridge regains its foothold. It's in the European, which is what you're looking at. It's in the GFS, which we've looked at earlier today. It does appear that the pattern favors something like this going forward. So that resets us back up with what we saw throughout much of the month of July. So given that that's the setup across the United States, we have to ask, is the rest of the global pattern kind of responding to that? So let's do that a couple of different ways. First, I want to show you globally what the precipitation pattern looks like over the next 10 days. Why don't we start in Europe? We do see that through the Iberian Peninsula, France. There's still some drier conditions and some heat's coming back onto southern Europe. But it's not the same extent of the heat wave we saw last week. Notice wetter conditions this week in parts of Ukraine, Poland, and even parts of Romania. All right. China, the North China Plain, the Manchurian Plain showing up wetter. The Yangtze River, a little drier. They flip-flop back and forth all season. Where the MJO lives, which is right in through here, extremely wet conditions, and we expect to see more active convection coming off of the Sahel. That's right in through this part of Africa. Now, in the near term, we're not seeing additional increases here in tropical activity, but we need to be watching this region And let's just keep an eye here as well. The models did go a little wetter right here off the Yucatan Peninsula. Could see some development at some point, just very weak signals at this point. And temperatures looking internationally, you do notice that quite hot. Look at that. In southern Europe, we see that over here in parts of China, could be warmer than normal. Parts of the Manchurian Plain, but there's no strong signal there. We're just hot in southern China through here. Much of Australia is going to be warmer than average. And in South America, I know we're not too concerned about what's going on here right now, just given the season. But we could be seeing some warmer than average conditions there as well. So I want to just kind of give you a global perspective on the things I was watching here as we wrap this forecast video up. I will look forward to that next Monday update as I expect to see a whole different pattern taking shape. And of course, we'll be giving that critical update on the tropics at that point as well. Have a good one, and I'll talk to you then. Thank you.